Hi, and welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Megan Figueroa.
And I'm Carrie Gillen. We went to a grocery store yesterday, and I have never, ever been that anxious before in my entire life. And I used to be pretty constantly anxious.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is like a whole new level for me, and one of my friends told me to get off the internet because I was, things weren't that bad. There's only 12 cases in Arizona.
Oh, there's more. We just don't know.
We don't know. And according to ABC News, it might be up to 70,000 people.
Already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of those cases won't be symptomatic at all. That's the problem. Most people who get it, or maybe not most, but a significant percentage of people who get it don't ever show any symptoms.
Right. That's why I was so anxious. I went 2 days ago to the grocery store, and it seemed pretty normal in the store, except the shelves.
The water was all gone.
Yeah. And tuna and stuff, very apocalyptic supplies were gone. When really I just wanted a gallon of milk. And so now I'm like, oh, we're running low on butter, but these are different times. I don't know. Do I go and get butter, or do we just survive without it? I don't know. Because I'm the anxiety for me is what am I passing on? What am I breathing into the air?
Well, okay. Yes, you could be a vector. But you could not yet be one, and someone else could be. I mean, it's all...
I know.
Yeah. Butter. Definitely probably should have gotten some extra butter. I have some in the freezer, so I'm kind of okay. But.
Yeah, no, I wasn't ready to pandemic shop.
Well, here's the problem. We should have been pandemic shopping maybe
3 months ago.
3 weeks ago.
Oh, 3 weeks. Okay.
Because people should have not been hanging out together as much as we were. Finally, people are starting to realize that, maybe things are really bad.
Yeah. Well, I hope people listening are staying as healthy as can be. I don't know. Maybe this is the first time you're listening to us because you're I have some free time on my hands.
And if so,
welcome.
It's not usually quite this much of a bummer.
I know. I'm usually way funnier and not about to cry at all times.
Yeah.
But no, I've been find it very lovely to see people on Twitter suggesting that people listen to our podcast or assign it in their classes, since school is all up in the air right now. Universities are up in the air. I
don't even know why they're bothering. They should just cancel the term.
Well, I was going to say this is a little bit more lighthearted, but I mean, I guess it is because coronavirus is pretty
dire.
But I filled out my census, and it took 2.5 minutes, which it was so quick.
I know.
But I specifically remember
2010?
Not 2010, because I think it was 2000 when I was 13 or whatever, being really excited when my parents got theirs and helping them fill it out. It was so much longer, and it asked about languages spoken in the home. It asked so many more questions. And now it really just asks birthday and race.
Yeah, and ethnicity.
That's ethnicity. It. Yeah.
Yeah, I was so shocked because I don't remember the 2010 census. I must have filled it in, but I don't remember it at all. But I certainly remember the Canadian one from 2000, I think. Around that era. And it was huge. Of course, I might have been one of the people who had the extra long census. I can't remember. But some people, some tiny percentage of Canadians also get an extra long one where they ask you a lot more information.
Like income and all that.
I think income might have been on the regular one.
Yeah, because we had income too. I was surprised.
Yeah, there was almost nothing. They asked almost no questions, and I was horrified. I wanted at least languages to be on there. For, kind of selfish reasons, but also I think it's important.
I was going to say, I use the census data from 2010 a lot to say how many Spanish-speaking families are in X area or whatever. That's really important information for lots of reasons. And I was very sad to see it not on there. And I can only imagine all of the the information that we're losing without income level too, like what kind of resources that we can provide for different pockets of places in the US. Like I was like, okay, great. They're like, everyone fill it out. It's easy. Like, please don't be afraid of your government. Like, if the citizenship status is something like you don't want to share, that's not going to be a part of it. But I'm like, oh, but then there's nothing here. Like, what are they getting out of this now?
Oh, just numbers, which is okay. We do need to know how many people there are in each region for a variety of reasons. You're still going to have to
provide representatives, right?
For representatives, they're still going to have to provide certain amount of resources, regardless of whether you know how many. For sure, you can still kind of guesstimate based on how many people there are in a particular region. So it's not completely useless information. It's just like the bare minimum.
Yeah, I was very, very shocked. I mean, this is also like, I guess, a PSA to say do it because it was so easy, and like don't even like worry about setting aside like an hour of your time. It really is so simple.
The good thing is it's really simple. The bad thing is if you don't have internet access, like what are you supposed to do?
I know.
I was surprised there was no physical version. I mean, I know there is a physical version because they were going around to certain more isolated regions and doing the census that way. So like door to door. But now with the pandemic, that should not be happening.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, I mean, I think libraries, it's only a matter of time before their libraries are shut down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is one place a lot of people could have done it, or where a lot of people do a lot of their internet access stuff. Yeah.
But again, there's still some places where there's not even that resource. Like they're that absolutely. Isolated.
Library deserts.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm so upset. Like I really want to know like how many indigenous languages are actually being spoken. I want to know these things. I mean, there's not even a way to answer that.
We have an episode coming up that's about Haitian Creole, and I was excited to see that Haitian Creole was on like my instructions on how to do the census. I was like, oh, there's Russian and Arabic. I was like, Haitian Creole, awesome, like upcoming episode. And then like I get in there and I'm like, there's no questions about language. This has really ruined my mood. I entered the little high I had about all of that. There's a tease for upcoming episode.
Yes, I'm very excited for that interview.
Me too.
Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Today we have Dr. Charisse King, who is a Provost's postdoctoral fellow and instructor in linguistics at the University of Chicago. She's a social linguist, and her research focuses on the facets and implications of identity construction for African Americans, in particular how African American speech is packaged, construed, racialized, and evaluated. And we particularly wanted to have you on to talk about the George Zimmerman murder trial and particularly Rachel Jeantel, and the intersection of language and the law. But we have a bunch of sort of preliminary questions to ask first, because I think there's a lot in there that our listeners may not know.
Yes. And Megan. Right. Megan may not know.
and me too, to be fair. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of course.
We've been wanting to talk to you for a while, so this is
okay.
Yeah, this is exciting for us. We really wanted to get into more of how language intersects with the law because it's so important. It's like life or death kind of important that a lot of people don't quite understand just because they haven't had to think about it. So we really appreciate you being kind of our first language and law person, right, Carrie?
Yay, okay, great.
So you employ ethnographic methods to study the social and linguistic diversity across racialized speakers. What are ethnographic methods?
Yes, so when I say ethnographic methods, I mean methods that are really attuned to sort of the community dynamics. So going into a community, thinking about how people see themselves in that community, as well as how they participate in it. And so there may be me doing a typical, what we call sociolinguistic interview, which is about an hour-long interview where we ask people a range of questions from, what part of the city did you grow up in? Who are your friends growing up? What are your hobbies, activities? How would you describe yourself? To, questions about language. Do you think, you have an accent? What do people like here, from here, talk like? Those kinds of questions. And then from there, I also like to just do things around collecting more information on the history of a place. So, reading up on how, especially for me, because I study African Americans, how African Americans came to live in this space, right? Did they come through the Great Migration? Okay, which part of the Great Migration? Maybe they came through the Dust Bowl migration, right? Which some people don't know that African Americans traveled to California via that means too. But, just asking these sort of historical questions while thinking about this historical lens in relation to the present time, right? What are the events that are happening? How are people coming together in the community, right? Around what shared sort of identities are they making use of? Those are the kinds of questions that I like to ask.
So you also talked about how African American speech is racialized. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so when I say that African American speech is racialized, what it means to racialize someone is to map them to a racial category, right? And so you can listen to a speech signal and people think that they're able to map them directly to belonging to a particular category, right? And this can happen for race, but this can also happen for gender. It can also happen for sexuality and a range of other social dimensions. And so when I talk about it, I'm curious as to the ways in which people do that differently across different kinds of African American populations, or the way they, when we get it wrong. What does that mean, right? Like, oh, this person was actually Black and we thought that their voice was white. What does that mean? Why? What acoustic cues were you getting in the signal to make you believe that?
So when you do ethnographic studies, are you able to kind of use the history that you gathered to kind of see how people get to X conclusion?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are ways in which you can start to make out. So, for example, I did some of my ethnographic work in a city that I'm from for my dissertation, which is Rochester, New York. And so there were interesting comments about how, well, we've heard that we sound country here. But, my grandparents migrated here in 1960 to work at this, and you start to see the history sort of the language based on where people are coming from. And they start to draw comparisons, of course, to like more popular cities like, the New York City area and say, for example, like we don't sound like them. We sound more country maybe in comparison. And that has to do a lot with the ways in which people's tie their identities also to some of these Southern roots.
What does country mean in this context?
Yeah, good. That's a great question. I think it means a lot. I think in some ways it does actually mean related to Southern patterning, like I monophthongization. So for example, if you say sky, like sky, right? In which you maybe the diphthong, the two parts of that diphthong gets reduced so that only a single aspect of that particular vowel is pronounced. There are ways in which like a Southern pattern like that shows up in the speech of African Americans North. And then there are ways in which it's just like, oh no, this is just different. And we're using country to mean not the same as us, but it doesn't mean Southern either. It just means a different pattern.
Every time I'm like, when I hear a sociolinguist talk about like ethnographic studies, I'm just like, y'all are doing such important work.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's work that I hold close to my heart because you're in some sense doing storytelling, right?
Absolutely.
Like you're relaying back people's narratives and histories into sort of this coherent kind of story about that place and what it means to speak like you're from that place.
What are racialized language patterns?
So racialized language patterns are language patterns that are associated with particular racial groups. So, for example, I think if we were to talk about certain white groups in this country, you would connect certain what we call vowel shifts or ways of sounding local to white speakers, right? So, like the Northern City shift, when they say things like cat or bat for cat and bat, people would associate that with the white speakers of some of the more northern cities like Rochester, right? But then there are other kinds of patterns that are associated, I think, with Black speakers. And you especially hear this in some of like the morphosyntactic features. Like if I were to say, he be walking to the store. So if I were to use habitual be, that would mean that this person is doing an act repeatedly or does it normally, regularly, right? He be going to the store or he be going to the mall. Then people would associate that with being Black because this is something that they've heard among Black speakers. Although now some are maybe making the argument that a marker like that is becoming more mainstream as we've seen it used across memes and things like that. There are just certain features that are racialized, meaning that they're associated with a particular racial group.
If you take away, say you're on the phone or something and you hear a pattern that's racialized, you might then assume that you're talking to a Black speaker if you hear the habitual be, something like that.
Yes. Yes. And so people make assumptions about you, right? Based on what I like to call these cues in the sound signal, and map you to a lot of different categories and then determine how you should be treated sometimes based on what categories they have mapped you to.
What are the social or political consequences of using these racialized language patterns?
Yeah, so the social and political consequences are that people can determine a certain kind of value for you or a certain way to treat you based on what they assume about you from your voice. So if I am calling for an apartment, and this is some of John Ball's research, if I'm calling for an apartment in a specific neighborhood where there aren't a lot of Black people living there, but I assume from the phone call that you have a Black voice and I want to keep this neighborhood less Black, right, and more white, then I might assume, okay, this person, I will not offer up the opportunity to come and view this apartment because I don't want to increase the number of Black people in this neighborhood, right? And so that's a kind of consequence or an example of a consequence that can happen. Other kinds of consequences are that people like to assume your intelligence, right, based on your voice. So maybe I might have some sort of implicit biases or about people who use y'all in their speech, right? Okay, well, this person might be more working class, or this person might be Southern, right? So that might mean that they're not as intelligent. So people form stereotypes based on the way that a person speaks.
These kind of implicit biases that you're talking about, they're really insidious because even people that are trying hard don't realize they're doing it. So you may make these assumptions about if people are working class or, you know, where they grew up or all these too. This is still not good, you know, like, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it operates in the same way that profiling and parsing, right? Like John Ball turned this linguistic profiling, right, to talk about people being denied of certain rights based on, you know, just their voice. And so it plays out just like racism would in any other context. If you were to see this person, right, in person and not hear their voice and just decide that they should be denied particular opportunities or rights on the basis of how they look, people can decide these things on the basis of how someone talks.
Yeah, on the basis of voice, which is one of our episodes, actually.
Yes.
You co-authored Language and Linguistics on Trial, Hearing Rachel Jean Tell and Other Vernacular Speakers in the Courtroom and Beyond. So why in particular did you want to study this case?
Yeah, so actually my co-author John, he began doing the work on it first, and I kind of came along and said, you know, this is super important. If there's any way I could be a part of it, I would love to. And I think for me, the feeling was just, this is such an important time in the culture, right? Like, I feel like everyone can remember where they were or what they were doing when they heard about Trayvon Martin, and then when they watched the case unfold on TV, right? I think both of those moments are so central to the culture, especially in thinking about the formation of Black Lives Matter. And so for me, I'm just like, we have so much of this important knowledge that I think stays in the Academy's halls, right? We don't get it out enough to the public. And so I just felt like this was just a really opportune time for us to come forward and say, actually, we have something meaningful to contribute to the society at large, about language, the law, and, the socio-political consequences of speaking a certain way.
Even non-Black viewers could see that something really gross was happening. Maybe not able to quite put their finger on what it was. So I'm just, this type of work, to get it out of the Academy, to get it out of the ivory tower, like you said, is so important, because there are people that want to understand why they're like, this is gross, right? I need to know why this is gross.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even till this day, people still don't quite understand, right? I'm grateful for these venues like this to discuss exactly what was happening.
Yeah, what was so gross in that courtroom in particular, and outside the courtroom too, because the media also played a role.
There are a lot of gross things. I'm like, I need to make a list for y'all.
I know, exactly.
Where do we start? Okay. Well, for one, you have a witness for whom I believe the jury did not have experience with the dialect that she spoke. And I believe that led to a lot of misunderstandings. And we have evidence of this both from the actual post-interview that one of the jurors gave with Anderson Cooper, in which she said, I didn't understand a lot of the things that she was saying. And later on in that same interview went to say she wasn't credible, right? And so you have misunderstandings, and then you have this link between misunderstanding someone and their sense of credibility that really needs to be teased apart, right? Because not being able to understand someone doesn't mean that they're not telling the truth, or doesn't mean that they're, not honest. But I think there may be some associations that are unaddressed that can be happening.
And it's kind of like one of those things where just knowing that maybe in the future people will stop, if they're on a jury, they'll stop and question themselves. Like, it's just like pausing for a second to reflect on this. Because, the thing where you go from, I can't understand someone no matter who it is, and then to, is this mean that they're incredible? That doesn't mean you're a bad person, right?
Yes.
That's not what we're saying.
It doesn't make you a bad person, but it makes you an unaware person.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, and that's hard for people to grapple with, is that this doesn't have to be an indictment on your entire character, right? This doesn't have to be that, you're all the way a bad person. And in fact, that's tangential. That's actually not really what's important, is to determine your character at this point in time, is to determine how do we correct this, such as to, mediate the misunderstandings and to come to a place where you are given the resources you need in order to make more informed decisions. So the other parts about this case that were interesting that John and I found out were that they didn't actually have access to the transcriptions during the deliberation. They can ask for a playback, maybe, but you can't actually see what was transcribed. And so a lot of what you go into these deliberations with, it seems as if maybe your memory. And so what gets emphasized in your memory? Maybe you remember the times in which this person said the N-word, or this person said, creepy ass cracker. Or you might remember, the time in which, okay, she said something, but I didn't understand, right? Like, what then are you evaluating? You're evaluating essentially the coherence of her performance for you, rather than just the facts that are at play.
Just thinking about what is coherent is different for different people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. And so definitely that's what I mean. Like your perception of her coherence is really, right, like the way to say that. Yeah.
So I've read also that in some jurisdictions, jurors aren't allowed to take notes or anything And so, yeah, it's all about their memory. And memory, as we know, is extremely fallible. I mean, not that notes would be like a perfect solution, but at least it would help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so you remember what, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys make apparent and keep reinforcing.
And sometimes they lie at the end, right? They say that something was said or was factually found, but that actually wasn't the case during the trial at all. So it's very frustrating.
Yeah, it's very frustrating, and also just happening all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And goes unnoticed in ways that no one will be held accountable for. But people will definitely be punished on, for. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, this is not like an indictment of like every lawyer ever, but I am sure that there are some lawyers that are specifically targeting the way that people speak. Like, they know what they're doing.
Yes. And so, there was a point in, I think, the trial in which they asked, okay, and you speak English, right? And she says yes, but that question is so loaded, right? Because we have so many varieties of English in this country and beyond. And there are ways in which just because you speak the same language, it doesn't necessitate that these sort of other subtle patterns, right? That other people are bringing to the table when they're giving a testimony. Again, we don't get to choose who gets to be the witness to the crime, right? We don't get to say, okay, we want this person who talks this way and looks this way to be the person to testify or to be the person to witness this event or be around for it and go, right? We don't get to set up characters and props in this sort of way. And so you have to take people where they're at, and you have to account for the potential misunderstandings that will inevitably happen when you're getting people from different parts of the population, right? I'm sure the jury that evaluated this testimony were not Rachel Gentile's peers. There's a way in which I think, and I'm sure there are great lawyers out there who do this kind of work, but there's a way in which you have to prepare or foreground these differences in order to really emphasize how they can affect or impact your perception of a person.
So what should have the prosecutors done in this case, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for one, they really needed to have some sort of expert witness involved to come and say, yes, actually, here's some discrepancies in the use of particular kinds of terms. So when talking about the N-word or talking about creepy ass cracker and talking about the offense of the terms, I think it would have been good to have somebody there. I also think it would have been good to, again, prepare Rachel for the potential backlash that would come. I don't know if they did that, but I felt as if there was a shift from the first day of the testimony to the second day. And that in part probably had something to do with the backlash, or maybe, the lawyers coming in afterward and say, hey, actually, people are saying this about you, right? Whereas it would have been nice for her to going there just more aware of the ways in which, she would be interpreted. Some people have suggested this is a broader issue too, having an interpreter. I think that comes with a lot of baggage that we can unpack, right? I mean, for one, again, assuming that you're not competent in English is one of the things that you run the risk of doing when you introduce an interpreter. But at the same time, it could have helped with perhaps some of the interruptions that were made. So we actually have the transcript, right, from the trial, and it shows certain instances in which jurors were interrupting the trial to say, I can't understand.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yes. And the judge is like, you can't interrupt. So it's very evident, it's very clear that there are misunderstandings. right? And again, those things just have to be foregrounded. I think in addition, there were just certain moments, and people have subsequently written about this, in which the Bernie de la Rianda helped to further stigmatize the way she spoke in terms of how he interacted with her, right? So, pardon my language, sorry, you said this, right? So you're sort of censoring her language when you're repeating it back to her, to give this kind of viewpoint to the audience that this is inappropriate language for this place, right?
Was this the prosecutor or the defense attorney?
This is the prosecutor. You're doing this with your own witness. Like, there are just certain ways in which not only Rachel needed to be prepared, but he needed to be prepared, right? To interact with the speaker for whom, spoke a different dialect than he did.
So lawyers should hire linguists, is what you're saying.
Basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree.
I think so. I think there's another part of this, and this is something that I'm actively working on right now with a set of courts, and that is, some have asked me to come in and give a couple lectures and trainings or workshops on the dialect, particularly of African American English, right? And linguist role in the courtroom, potentially what it could be. But what this is going to do is expose court transcribers to a dialect that they're not used to hearing, such that when they go to transcribe and they're like, I don't know if I, did this right, maybe now they'll have more awareness to say, oh, this is an av pattern. They're saying this. Right? And we want more accurate transcriptions because that's important. Not even just in the courtroom, but especially in the when you're collecting depositions and things like that, and those things are transcribed. People can come back and, like, this is essentially what Don tried to do, and use this against Rachel to say, well, you said this here. But it looked as if it probably were a mistranscription or some sort of error of some part. So yeah, I think that it's important for people to just have a greater awareness of other kinds of patterns that exist across the English language.
Were there any African Americans on the jury?
No, I've heard, in my memory, I'd have to go back, but I heard there were no African American women. I do believe there was a Latina woman. Yeah.
Did the defense make sure of that or something? Because I know in some other cases, like Flowers case, where multiple times the prosecutor made sure that there were no Black people on the jury at all. So
I am not quite positive about that, but I suspect, like, my hunch is probably yes, because this happens all the time, right? Like, people can just easily eliminate whomever they want from the jury just based on a feeling, rather than, having to go through a rigorous process to prove, like, this person doesn't belong.
But, like, in Florida, that is not representative of, like, demographics, right?
Yeah, right. When we think of where Rachel is from, and even of her own language background, like, it's so rich. People don't know that she's multilingual. She spoke she spoke this variety of English, but she also knows Spanish and Haitian Creole, and this is something that we've seen celebrated in other contexts. Like, when I think about
Princess Charlotte.
Yes, Princess Charlotte. Oh, she's learning 2 languages, showing that, she's wise and X, Y, and Z, right? We celebrate it in those contexts. And, I just wish that celebration were extended equally across different populations. Most of the world is multilingual, actually, right? And so I just wish that we extended that to other kinds of speakers and found it valuable.
I definitely felt like she was being penalized for being a Spanish and Haitian Creole speaker, for sure.
Yeah. And I think there were, like, pieces of that also showed up in the acoustic signal in these different ways, right? So it wasn't even that she was just speaking Av or African American vernacular English, is what I mean when I say Av, but she was also influenced by other varieties in, her repertoire, right?
So I also want to talk about the media's role in this case, because I felt like the media, for the most part, failed miserably. And they also seemed to misunderstand who she was and what her variety was, and that she was an English speaker. What can we do to, I don't know, convince the media to wake up about language?
That's a harder. Yeah, that's a harder question, but a great one. Let me think about what would be. I think just in general, my approach is always to move toward celebration of, again, multilingualism and multiple dialects, right? I think that the critiques that she saw in the media, right, for the way she spoke, are not disconnected from a general disdain for people who speak different languages altogether, right? And so this is a larger issue, right? We can't accept people who speak different dialects if we can't accept people who speak different languages, right? Because it ultimately reflects different ways of life. And sometimes people use that as a fear tactic, to divide ourselves or to punish people or say people don't belong, right? But if we could come to a point where we more broadly, again, just accept different ways of being, which will include different ways of speaking in the society, then we can start to address some of the more public backlash that certain speakers face. And we can't also separate, for at least a speaker like Rachel Jantel, like, you want her to have access to a particular dialect of English that is not the most readily available where she probably comes from in terms of resources to teach her and her classmates, this academic language of power, right? And so that's another thing that I think people need to have awareness of. But I think there's just always this move or desire to judge and not have more grace on people's circumstances and differences in backgrounds.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, she was also relatively young.
Yeah. And, we've seen people speak like this who have been rewarded for it, right? Like, we've seen certain guests on Dr. Phil and these other kinds of TV shows. Okay, they speak in this, accent from some Southern communities or some inner city communities, and they're automatically rewarded and given special privileges in the society, whether that be in the form of record deals or just more public media attention, right? Like, it's lauded in a certain kind of way that when it occurs on particular kinds of Black bodies, it's not.
Yeah, she was under 18, wasn't she? Like, I mean, maybe not when to trial, but when it all happened.
When it all happened, I believe she was 17 or 18 at the time. And, like, I think we forget the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Like, I can't imagine
the
trauma of being, this was a person for whom they developed a friendship where they were talking regularly for hours a day on end. And, like, to get off the phone with someone thinking, okay, something happened, but they'll call me back when something is better, to hear like, no, this person is never coming back. And then to have to talk publicly, right, about the experience of having the last words with your friend on the phone. And then to be humiliated, right, by the public for talking, like, how dare you talk about it like that? I just think we are just not sensitive enough to the circumstances.
Definitely not.
No, we aren't.
Especially back then. I think we're slightly better now, at least about trauma. Like, I think at least that might trigger some thought to be more careful now than it was then. But still, there's still a lot more that we need to do better on, including even that.
Yeah, because we have set up this system, like, the media, lawyers, judges and juries have set it up so that the people that are testifying have to testify in a certain way to be taken seriously, instead of it being on us to hear it differently. And I think that's where we need to start shifting it towards. We need to pause and reflect and not expect someone to come to us while they're being re-traumatized to be, wouldn't it make most sense that she would speak in the way that she's most comfortable? Like, even if she were like if you have to prepare someone to speak a completely different way, that's dishonest too. Like, it can be very difficult.
Yeah, and to learn an entire new, dialect in a day. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like a terrible product that will be on the Dialect in a Day.
It's probably already in existence.
Someone probably in Silicon Valley is making the app for it.
Exactly.
Yep.
But, this is why I say, when I say prepare, they should have prepared Rachel. It's not to say teach her the dialect.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But
right.
Yeah, just make her aware, look, you speak in this kind of way, and people may not understand. If you think there are aspects or certain words that people might not understand, elaborate. Maybe it's hard to do that in a court setting, but,
I mean, yes, but I mean, most people have to learn how to elaborate in those circumstances anyway. So, it feels like they should have done that for her. That just seems like basic knowledge that they should have given her, and it doesn't seem like they did.
Yeah, it just seems as if the best case wasn't put forward.
Definitely not. And there were some people who thought that was on purpose, and I hope that's true.
That's the other thing. It's sad that we even have to talk about it in this kind of way. The best case wasn't put forward because it should have been enough, right? But especially when you come to these more contentious kinds of cases, it just seems like you have to be near perfect, unfortunately.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, and then whereas other cases, they could be completely sloppy and you'll still get a conviction because
exactly
the people involved are sort of reversed.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think it's so young. It's so traumatizing. But to think that, because of the witness that we have and this whole, misunderstanding or credibility thing, you don't want to put, someone, the whole guilty or not guilty on one person because of the way they speak. That's, we need to think about how, terrible that is that we're doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. And we do it
all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the time. And make people feel bad about, not having spoke another way, despite the fact that, this is what these are the tools and resources that they have at the moment, right? Again, we don't get to choose who gets to be the witness.
I hope she's not feeling guilty for this because I would if it were me. And it's not fair.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I mean, I don't know nowadays how she might be dealing with the trauma. I hope she's, found some outlets for healing and whatnot, but I certainly would have felt as if, oh man, this people are trying to make me feel like this is my fault. Because people did.
Yeah, people did. They definitely put it all on her shoulders, and yeah, it's not her.
And to think about how the media messed this up, the people that are jurors, they don't see the media stuff during it, right? They're not supposed to, at least. And that's not going to help them. But we're still talking about this, right? The media could have done a better job to help future jurors, to help, future situations where we could all learn to, again, stop and think about about what kind of assumptions we're making based on people and how they speak.
Yes. And sometimes they failed and they continue to fail because one of the special things about language is that we all speak it. So we always think that we know what we're doing or what's going on. And it's not always the case, right? Sometimes you need a linguist or an expert in the room to say, oh, yes, these are the patterns. Here's the logic. Here's the rule-governed system. This is what people are doing when they speak this way. They're following a systematic, right, set of rules. None of it is random. None of it is just, grammatical mistakes. It's a different way of speaking. And it would be nice if different kinds of, media sources actually reached out to experts to ask them about, hey, what does it mean to speak a different variety? What are some of the rules? How do you study it? And just to make sort of linguistic understanding of, what linguists do and the study of languages and dialects more respected, right? And just more appreciated.
It may not be your fault that you've been exposed to these things because of circumstance of where you live. Maybe you don't watch certain types of media or whatever. but that shouldn't again be placed on people like Rachel when you're then a juror, right? Like, we just need much more exposure to, and yeah, media could help so much with this.
Yeah, just the exposure, and it would be easy to do, like, because it's all around us, and we've seen that people appreciate these linguistic differences across different contexts, right? So you listen to your favorite song, you see your favorite slogan become a hashtag on social media, right? These are ways in which those differences show up and are celebrated and appreciated by the mainstream society. So it's not that it can't become that, right? It's just that it's only that in those contexts.
Excellent point. Which, these are life or death. These are very, very important contexts that we are straight up fucking up.
Absolutely.
We've been saying how the types of things we can learn from cases like this. Are there anything that we've missed that you feel like big takeaway message from what we didn't learn the first trillion times things like this have happened?
I guess I would just say that I always like to reinforce to people, this is just not an isolated event. This isn't even just isolated to the way that African Americans speak, but this happens across the world, right? And other kinds of communities where Creoles, or patois, or, just other varieties are spoken that may be not considered the language of power. There are misinterpretations. And we actually need more research to look into the ways in which these misinterpretations guide people's decisions and judgments on credibility.
And we can use that, just us as listeners, as perceivers, in our everyday lives. Think about the assumptions that you are making about someone's credibility or about their background or where they come from just because of what you're hearing. That can make us all less assholes if we would just stop it.
If you could step back a sec and say, oh, okay, that's a different tone of voice. That's a different this, right? That's a different word than I would use. But, maybe there are some linguistic differences as a possibility, right? Of shading the ways in which you interpret things, right? It would help, I think.
And there's not just one right way to do language. I think this is something that we're consistently taught in school, is that there's one right way, and people really latch on to that, and it's really hard to shake them up.
It is, and that's because some people, I think, feel like if they've had to be the ones to acquire or already came into the position of occupying, right, the state where they know this language, right, it's a kind of power they hold over other people, ultimately. And they want to continue to exercise that. And so it's not surprising that this contributes to notions of classism and ways in which people want to maintain their own positions in the society, because that's kind of what, this kind of economic system prompts us to do, is to think about the ways in which language can be capital and the ways in which people want to maintain their capital. I think there are speech therapists who I've heard this from, but difference doesn't mean deficit.
Yes.
And I think that's really hard for people to get a handle on.
Yes.
Is.
So that's what I hope people will take away, just more understanding and patience for encountering speakers or, experiences that are not their own.
Yeah, because if we have a little bit more of that, perhaps people like the jurors in the jury box for the George Zimmerman trial could have stopped and thought, okay, what is it that is making it so I don't understand? What exposures have I had? What experiences have I had? Not going straight to, is this person credible? It's just that shift.
Yeah. And people are starting to do this research. I mean, I want to say this was Lavari and Kesar had I think they did an experiment in which they gave people some trivia facts and tested the extent to which one's perceived accentness contributed to how much the person believed the trivia fact.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think people tended to disbelieve the trivia facts when, you had a particular accent. So, again, this is a thing.
No, it's a total thing. Yeah. Well, this has been an amazing conversation.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Me again.
Oh, thank you for coming. This is
so
important. It's so important.
And we finally got to it.
I know. Well, we wanted to make sure to have the right guest on, so we really appreciate it.
No, thank you for inviting me again.
Of course, thank you.
I enjoyed talking with you both.
Oh, thank
you for being open to discussing these issues with your listeners.
Yeah, yes. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And we hope that our listeners will continue to not be assholes.
Yes. Yay! Don't be an asshole.
Yay for not being assholes.
Yay!
We would like to thank from last month another new patron, Joel Tillman.
Yes, thank you so much, Joel.
If you would like to become our patron, you can at patreon.com/vocalfriespod. And at the $5 level, you get bonus episodes.
Yes, very fun.
Fun.
Very salty.
Usually very salty.
Listen, we're so much fun in person. I gotta tell you.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at VocalFriesPod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.